Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be doing something that I love, and that is building a computer. Alright, I want to start this video and be honest with you, this is technically not a brand new PC build, but this is actually my personal computer that I have taken apart and I'm going to rebuild it, and I thought I might as well go ahead and bring you guys along for the ride. I know plenty of people that love building computers that don't love taking them apart and putting them back together again, so that may be just for a certain group of people. This computer is actually only roughly about a year old, and what I'll quickly do is kind of just tell you a little bit about the system. Last year in the spring of 2022, I was trying to think about what I wanted to do different with this particular build. Now overall, the systems I build for myself are never really flashy. They're not really a lot of lights and bling and RGB and things like that. I typically tend to like something a little bit more subtle, and even if it didn't have any RGB, I would have been pretty happy. So I started off in the early spring looking for the right kind of case, and I've used different cases over the years, and some I have that are my favorites. Several Corsair cases, Lee & Lee, Fantex and NZXT, and then some others here and there, old Cooler Master cases that I have, some nostalgic ones. But when I was thinking about a case that kind of, when you look at it, just means more business than fun, I kept coming back to the Fantex N3 Pro, and this thing is great. I love this case. And so I started off with the case and kind of went from there, and the build took a few months, probably almost up to about 4 to 6 months to kind of complete. And started off after the case, I got the CPU, motherboard, and memory, and then even that, I had the motherboard for a little while, which was an Asus TUF motherboard. Fantastic board, nothing wrong with that, but I ended up upgrading that later on to the X570, which is a much better board. Just in terms of its functionality and the things that I need. And then I eventually upgraded the 32 gigabytes of RAM to 64 gigabytes of RAM, and then kind of finalizing it all with the storage that I wanted, and then also with a graphics card, and kind of rounding it all off. So together the system's been up and running for about 8 to 9 months. It's been fantastic, but over time they collect a little bit of dust. So I decided I would take the opportunity to take it apart, and since I was kind of renewing things in the channel, maybe put it back together again and take you guys along for the ride. All right, I'm gonna start by moving my coffee here because you just know that somehow it's going to spill and go over everything, and then I'd have to make this video a sad one. Let's start with the motherboard right here in the center, and actually it's the one thing that I kind of have all together. And along with that, I do have the CPU box out here only because the CPU is in the motherboard. The one thing, as I took it all apart, I did not completely disassemble was the AIO, and that's mostly because I didn't really want to remove the thermal paste. I'm using Thermal Grizzly's Cryonaut Extreme in here, and that's a pretty pricey thermal paste that I love, and it works really, really well. I'm gonna move this box out of the way right now, but that's the box for the Ryzen 9 5900X. Basically, when I was looking for a CPU that I was going to choose, and the AM4 platform by this point has been a lot more matured. X570 had been out for a little while, and in fact the B550s have been out a little while as well. And I started off with the B450, which at first kind of met all the needs, checked off all the boxes. The board itself, the B450 TUF, it was actually the second version, which had better MOSFETs and some other things, better cooling. I decided actually for the color scheme, for one, the aesthetic, I like the gray and the black on the Gigabyte board, and it seemed to have everything that I wanted in terms of more expandability, some better PCI Express connectivity, along with some more USB ports. And it does have built-in Wi-Fi 802.11 AX or Wi-Fi 6E really, which is nice, which I don't really use, but if I need it, it is there. So I kind of left everything together intact. I'm using the EK 360mm rad, and it's a pretty nice cooler. I wanted to make sure, again, nothing was super flashy or anything, so I made sure to get the one that had no RGB on the block or on the fans themselves. And so I did basically take the fans off. I cleaned all of the 360 pretty good. I didn't run it through with any water. I know some people do that, but I did do a pretty good job getting in there with a nice brush and cleaning out most of the dust. And overall, the computer itself wasn't really that dirty, but it was dirty enough and warranted a clean PC is a happy PC. So I chose the 5900X 12-core, 24-thread, mostly for budget reasons, and it kind of was better than the 8 cores and not as good as the 16, but a nice middle ground, and for all the video work, video encoding, and some audio work. And it really is solid, and I think I'll probably be hopefully keeping it for a couple more years until I'll probably just eventually go to the new platform. The memory, like I said, I went from 32 gigs to 64, mostly just for a little bit of future proofing, for lack of a better word. And actually this memory in particular, I had not used in a long time so far as brand. This is the Patriot Viper memory. I hadn't used Patriot really until, let's see, I think it was the Pentium 4. Actually, no, that's not true. I used it in AMD FX build. I think was the last system I used it in. But it's probably been a solid 7 years or so since I had used anything Patriot. And they made some pretty good memory sticks back in the day. And I'd seen them, they'd still been around, but I hadn't really used them very much. But this is the Viper series, and this one in particular is a 3600 kit at 1836. If I'm not mistaken. I did have it running for a short time at 3800 without much trouble, but I eventually started to get a few errors here and there in some programs, so I ended up clocking it back down to the 3600. But it runs very, very well and very stable at 3600 speeds. Snap that back in there, nice solid snap. But with the motherboard features and all of what it had, it provides plenty of power to the CPU. The heat sinks are actually really nice on this particular Aorus board. And I hadn't really had a Gigabyte board in a little while, actually since maybe like 2013. But it's a pretty solid board. And the 360 rad does a great job keeping everything pretty well in check. I think the highest temperatures I typically see might be, I don't know, 85, 86 degrees Celsius when everything is pretty much under the heaviest load with all the cores utilized. So it's pretty nice overall. And I do like these fans that come with a cooler, the Vardar S's. I did use a variation of the Vardars back when I did my own custom liquid cooling setup, and these were really nice, and I like them a lot. They're pretty quiet overall. Of course, when they're ramped up all the way, they're loud, just like any fan would be. And then I do have the case fans, which I took apart, again, cleaned them all. These three came with the Fantex N3 Pro, and so two go on the front, and then one on the back. And then of course I have to kind of do some manipulation of the fans because of the one in the back exhaust, and then the three on top are exhaust from the AIO. So I have to kind of ramp up the front too to kind of hopefully alleviate some of that negative pressure. The storage that I have in the system, I actually have 2 of the M.2 slots occupied on the motherboard. I have the 3rd slot right now that is free, so I'm not using that at the moment, but that could be occupied pretty soon in the future when I upgrade one of my other drives. Right now I have a 500 gigabyte Crucial P5 Plus, which works really well as my main drive for Windows and basic programs. And then I have 1 terabyte Samsung 980. It is the non-pro version, but it works really well. That's my editing drive, and I use that for Premiere Pro and editing my video files. And then I have this Samsung 870 QVC, or QVO, excuse me, drive. I've used the EVOs many times, never actually been able to get my hands on the Pro series of the 2.5 inch, but the EVO served me pretty well in a couple builds, and so I had a great deal on this QVO, and this is one of their cheaper models, even more so than the EVO. But it's just a 2 terabyte, 2.5 inch solid state drive. I use it for my game library. It works really well for me. So the price that I paid for it, I think at the time it was a pretty good deal for, I think around $120, which a year ago was pretty nice for a 2 terabyte drive like that. And then the other drive I have, which I know some people are like, oh man, you still have a hard drive, hard disk. But I do, because it was available and I needed a scratch disk for my computer. So basically scratch disk is just a drive that's sort of like the spare, and you kind of put whatever random on it that you need temporarily for the time, and then it can come off when you're done with it. And so this is just a 3 terabyte NAS hard drive pulled from a direct attached storage, Western Digital dual enclosure that I had, upgraded the hard drives on it, and then took the 2-3 terabytes out. Didn't need them anymore, so I kind of had them sitting in a drawer for about a year. So then I figured I might as well pull that out and use that. Right now, the biggest setback or delay in any of the work I do is if I make a pretty big video project file and I still once in a while will do a Blu-ray copy or a DVD copy. Typically the best way to do that is using my Apple program compressor, and in order to transfer it over to my Mac, I can do it over the network, which is gigabit, or I can transfer it onto a drive and then transfer it over. And typically the transferring to drive is still faster overall, but the amount of time it takes to transfer about 150 to 100 gigabyte file over USB 3.0 speeds, max read-write speeds, 150 megabytes per second if you're doing really good. So that takes a little bit of time. So I would see the biggest benefit from upgrading that sometime in the near future, which I really would love to be able to do. Next, we have our sound card. This is an Asus Zonar STX first gen sound card. Back in 2009 or 10, got into some high-end audio and was trying to better my computer quality. So I purchased this card. It was actually a really good deal. It was a refurbished version of the card. I guess something on it needed to be repaired, or maybe it was returned and then sold. Got it for about half price. And I know anybody that's sort of into high-end audio of any kind right now probably would look at the internal sound card and say, blech, And I probably agree with you 100%. It's typically best to use external DACs and keep those clocks separate outside of the case rather than inside. But this is a really good sound card, and especially before 2008 and earlier, internal sound cards were still pretty awesome, and this is definitely no exception. Accepts basically 1/4-inch headphone jack, and it powers pretty much any headphones I've ever tried to use. It basically still works just great. It has Windows drivers for Windows 7, 8, 10, which works fine on 11. So I guess until probably the drivers don't work anymore is probably when I'll stop using it. Biggest downside to it really is that it requires a 4-pin Molex connector, which nowadays most people trying to stop using that. But I do have a nicer black sleeved extension Molex cable. Tends to make it look a little nicer. So awesome card, I love it. It may not be for everybody, but certainly something that I want to keep using if I can in my systems. And then we have the graphics card. This is some people's favorite part of their build. This in particular is the Radeon RX 6800 XT, and I got this card used on Facebook Marketplace. Well, I found this guy selling this card for a really good deal, and he actually had already done the modification that I was going to do by tightening up, putting some washers underneath the area of the GPU die and sort of tightening it down, because it's using one of those Hitachi thermal pads. And so I think it did improve temperatures by a few degrees Celsius. I don't think he replaced the thermal paste or replaced the pad with thermal paste. So that's something I could do in the future if I wanted to. The card actually does pretty well right now, so I didn't really want to change anything. This is the Midnight, particularly black edition, so there's no silver on it except for some of the chrome accents. And it's really nice, and I love the size. And even though I've got a case that could fit bigger cards, it's just nice that it's a lot smaller, I think. And it works very well for everything that I do. I use a 3440 by 1440p 21:9 monitor. It's a nice resolution that's in between the typical 16:9, 2560 by 1440, and the 4K resolution 3840 by 2160. And it runs pretty much everything I use very well. So very happy with this card and totally recommend it. I think for a while the 6800 XTs were actually like sold big time and off shelves and things. So definitely a good choice. Then we have the power supply. And actually it's a kind of funny story with the power supply. This is a Corsair RM1000X, so a 1000 watt power supply. It's modular. Most of the time for power supplies that I use in builds, I typically use EVGA, Corsair, Seasonic. I actually had an EVGA 1300G Plus Supernova power supply, and I got it at a great deal at Micro Center. And if you've never been to a Micro Center, you should certainly try to find to see if there's one near you. And I got this EVGA power supply. It was really great. more power than I would need, at least for a long time. The problem was that it had some coil whine, and I'm typically not one to, be really like upset about coil whine. It's fine if it has a little whine. Nothing wrong with the power supply, it's just making some noise. But most of the time when I use headphones and things, it wasn't a big deal. But after a couple of months, the coil whine just got to be more than I cared for, and finally just decided, you know what, I'm gonna try and sell it. Still functions great, works fine, and I even thought about keeping it. But I went out and bought this power supply, replaced it only just about 2 months ago, and it is super silent. There is no coil whine. Fantastic, can't hear it at all, even the fan is quiet. But I've got the RMX 1000 here, which is pretty nice, and it works very, very well. Great power supply. And then I also have, which I purchased just about a month ago, a set of Crazy Horse cable extensions for the power supply, just to kind of make things look nice, a little bit cleaner, and fantastic if you've never bought any of those. Just an easy way to, 30 bucks or so, just to kind of clean up some of the cables, make them look nice. Well, I don't think there's anything else to cover or go over, so I think without any further ado, let's put this stuff together. Wait, I forgot something. It's because it's inside the case here. I completely forgot it was there. I have a small LCD panel. You might think to yourself, well, why in the world do you have that? It's pretty neat. This is actually just like an open 7-inch LCD panel bought from Amazon. They have several different models available. Just basically 7-inch LCD, has a full-size HDMI and a micro USB for power, and then an on-off switch right there. And I just have it on this little stand, and I have it on my desk. I watched a Jay's 2 Cents video several months ago, and he showed how to make a sensor panel for your computer. You can put your CPU utilization, GPU utilization, power limits and fans, and how much power things are consuming, and then of course the load of the CPU or the GPU. Pretty cool. And I went ahead and designed one for my computer and have been using it for a while now. So I have this just sitting on my desk, and it's really nice to be able to see my monitor and then just see the sensor panel right there all the time. Definitely something that's not for everybody, but I love it. I think it's great. And then I made one for a friend of mine who uses it on his. And I know some people like to put them inside the case, like on the side glass panel and stuff. But the way that I have my system, it'd be kind of inconvenient for me to kind of look over from my monitor and see how small some things are. So I like it really right on my desk and kind of sitting there. So that's why that's there. And now I think I've covered everything. So without further ado, I think. there it is. It is complete. And some of the cable management was a little bit more than I thought it would be, but definitely worth it. The cable combs and everything tying that in looks nice, both on the 24 pin and the graphics card. I didn't really put any cable combs on the CPU power because you really can't see it with it being up in that corner. But yeah, I think everything looks real good, turned out really well. I didn't change anything in the BIOS, everything should be configured exactly the same way that I had it. Let's fire it up and we'll take a look and see, hopefully it running really well. Hope there's really no issues with the cable extensions or anything either. Good, all the orange LEDs are on. You can see it's just a little bit on the card, on the motherboard, and then up top. Oh, it's currently using the small monitor, the little LCD that I have. That's pretty funny. And there it is. Well, I'll probably clean the side panel off before I put it back on, but I think all in all everything is pretty much done. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the video and coming along with me as I rebuilt my computer. I had a lot of fun, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and also don't forget you can follow me on social media at Instagram or on Facebook. It's just Bobby's World of Tech, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.